Hi, everybody. My name's Jean, and I'm an alcoholic. You know, being asked to the Shenandoah Roundup was real special to me because when I went to Waynesboro, I must have fallen in love a dozen times. And I knew that when I came back here, I might see some of those very important men in my life, Rudy and Jack and Larry and Fay. And it was really special to me to come back because it was like coming back home. I fell in love with Waynesboro, and I fell in love with its people. When Larry called me and asked me to come here, he said, you know, we're getting another male speaker from Baltimore. Maybe you know him. And I said, well, who is it? And he said, it's Lamar. He's an old-timer. Do you know him? And I said, well, no, but I'm going to make an effort to go out and find this man because we'll be coming here together. And I had asked around, and I had understood that Lamar was celebrating an anniversary a couple weeks ago. So I made it a point to go to the 857 Club in Baltimore, and it's the oldest club we have, and it's a lot of old-timers. And I went up to this charming, nice-looking man, and I said, hi, my name is Jean, and I'm from Pikesville, and I understand that you're going to the Shenandoah Roundup too. And he was so kind and soft-spoken and gentle. I just felt real comfortable with Lamar right away. And he said, you know, since we're going, maybe we could ride together. And I said, well, I'm leaving for Richmond, but I could follow you. He said, oh, that'll be fine. And I heard Lamar speak, and I really liked him. He had a very slow, laid-back way about him. So we made arrangements that I would meet Lamar on the way here. And he told me before I left the house, my mother said, now look, I want you to drive careful and arrive safely. I said, Mom, you know, I met this guy Lamar, and he's an older man, and he's real laid back and slow. I said, he's probably going to do 40 miles an hour. We'll get there in 3 days. So I met Lamar, and he said, now look, Jean, we're going to do 70 and then 81. Now, I didn't know that he meant miles per hour. We were within 10 miles of here. And I think that he beamed me here. He pulls over real quick and he jumps out of the car, and by now I have been driving at top speeds. My face is pulled back, my hair is standing straight up, and he said, I hope I wasn't driving too slow. I said, no, Lamar. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even let go of the wheel. I was so nervous. So, you know, these old-timers can fool us sometimes. I was having lunch with Lamar today, and he said, you know, when I was new in the program, he said, I wanted to start a new anonymous program. And I said, you did? What was it? And he said, Celibacy Anonymous. And I said, Celibacy Anonymous? I know we have over 157 12-step programs, anonymous programs, but I couldn't figure out what a Celibacy Anonymous program was. So I said, well, Lamar, what were you all going to do? He said, well, there's going to be a bunch of old guys sitting around a table, drinking coffee, praying for a slip. You know? He's quite charming. When I was growing up, I grew up in California and Baltimore, and when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my mother married someone in the program. And it's nice that I'm going to tell you this. Between my father and I, we have 48 years, better than 48 years, continuous sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But since this is an honesty program, I also have to tell you that 42 of those years are his. So you know just about where I am in the program. But I had heard the words Alcoholics Anonymous. But you know, when I was growing up, an alcoholic woman was not on my list of things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a movie star, or, you know, a president, or a congresswoman, or anything, but I never really given serious thought to becoming a woman alcoholic. And when I was 14 years old, they were divorced. And there was a fierce custody battle over us. And neither one of them can decide to this day. One of them got us, and one of them got the color TV. And neither one of them knows who got the most colorful thing. They still argue over that today. I didn't see my stepfather for more than 25 years. It's not like we can reach out and touch someone. I just wasn't interested. So I remember my first alcoholic drink. I was 17 years old. I remember what I was drinking. It was Mogen David wine. And I made a discovery at that time that Mogen David wine is the same color coming up as it is going down. And I had 3 years of sobriety before my next drink. You see, I went through this hangover, this headache, and your hair hurt, and I wasn't real anxious to do that again. But I was approaching my 21st birthday, and someone said to me, "Gene, why don't we take you down on the block?" Now, the block area in Baltimore at that time was an area of prostitution and pimps and dancers and strippers and plenty of alcohol and little bands. And these bands would just play music while women took off their clothes and men would buy them drinks. Now, I went down there celebrating my 21st birthday, and I took a look around, and by now I'm drinking, having a good time. And I said, you know, this really isn't a bad way to make a living. All you have to do is dance a little bit, take off your clothes, and men buy you drinks and give you money. You know, I was looking for an easier, softer way even then. And I thought, this is a great thing. But the next morning I woke up, and I had to give that some second thoughts, because again, I felt bad. I had the hangover. And I thought, you know, prostitution maybe is not the real area that I wanted to go in, although the fee that they paid these women, $100 an hour, appealed to me. So I wanted to be a $100 an hour woman. But I just couldn't do it without drinking. And a couple months later, someone said to me, you know, Gene, law enforcement might be a good career for you to go into. Why don't you think about being a female law enforcement officer? And I gave that some thought, and I thought, you know, maybe that'll be a pretty good career. And a couple weeks later, there was an article in the paper. They were testing for a female law enforcement officer with the Baltimore City Police. And I thought, well, that's kind of like prostitution, you know. So they said, come down and join the men in blue. And that appealed to me. So I went down, and to my surprise, I arrived at the Civic Center, and there were 500 other women there to take this test. And I can remember saying, God, you know, I'd really like to have this job. It offers a lot of benefit. There's a lot of security in it. If you could see your way clear, I'd really like to have this job, because I'm the type of person, I ask God for everything. You know, I'm a give me, take me, buy me, bring me. If I don't have it, I'll die person. And I always ask God for everything. So I said, you know, I'd really like to have this job. And I took the test with 500 women, and 30 of us passed it. And I'm not an exceptionally bright person, and to this day I don't know how I passed that test. But they said, well, you 30 women will go to phase 2. And phase 2 is you went before a 7-man board. And the 7-man board said to us individually, why do you want to become a female law enforcement officer? And I said, because I want to make contributions to the citizens of Baltimore, and I want to make a better life for people, and I want to make it easier. And they seemed to like that answer, and I went to phase 3. and I went before a 3-man board, and I was retested. I was given a psychological test, and 2 weeks later, I was notified that I would enter the Baltimore City Police Academy with 35 male officers. And I was the only female in my class, and they told me, as a female, we expect you to graduate at least in the top 3 of your class. And I studied real hard, and I wanted this very much, and I graduated second in my class. And my first assignment was to the old Pine Street Police Station. And to tell you how long ago that is, that place is a museum today. But that was my first assignment. And what our job was there, you know, we had a law at that time. If you were drunk on the street or disorderly, you were arrested. You were not picked up and taken to hospitals like they take people today or rehab centers. You were arrested and brought in and placed in a cell. And we sent our alcoholics. It was my first experience with an alcoholic woman. I had never seen an alcoholic before. I had never seen a woman dragged in leg irons and handcuffs, begging and screaming and fighting, and urinating and vomiting on themselves. I had never seen that before. I had never seen a woman alcoholic. And I had never seen where we loaded 20 of them up at a time into these big black wagons, and we transported them to the state mental hospitals. And we'd have 20 of them in there, chained to each other. And there were large leather belts around them, and their handcuffs were in front of them. And if one went off, another one would go off. I had never seen insanity due to alcoholism before, but I knew I didn't want it. And I said, God, don't ever let me end up like that. And we used to have the regulars come in, the regular women, and we looked for them weekly because the street was a very dangerous place for a woman alcoholic to be. And I looked for them. And we had one regular come in all the time, and we always liked to see her, but you had to watch her because she would either cold cock you when you weren't looking, or she would kick you. So when we'd have her come in, we'd have her stand to the side of us so we could search her. And she came in one day, and I was standing there searching her, and I had my foot just barely touching her leg irons in the center of her feet. And I'm searching her, and I look over, and I notice that she's got this beautiful, angelic smile. And I hadn't seen it before, and I said to her, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm peeing in your shoe." And I looked down, and she was. I had started my alcoholic drinking by this time. I'll tell you how I drank. And I'm still very much in the habit of this today. I never had time to waste social drinking. I went right into alcoholic drinking. I've gone out and I watch people order drinks. And they'll order something like this. "I'll have a whiskey sour. And would you put a cherry and a lemon and an orange and an umbrella in it?" Now, I never had time for umbrellas and cherries and fruit. If I was hungry, I'd order dinner. I went right in to the very fast drinking straight out of a glass. I got in the habit, and I still have it to this day, of drinking through a straw because I can get it faster and I wouldn't spill any. And if I could have gotten away with it, I would have shoved a piece of garden hose in there and sucked it up through that just to get it faster. I loved it. I loved its effects. And I was not a patient person. I want to be instant drunk, instant high, instant feeling good. And I had started my alcoholic drinking and coming into work the next day with very bad hangovers. And there were several times when we would take these wagon load of alcoholics out to the 3 state mental hospitals, and they would mistakenly think I was one of them. You know, when I had to explain to them, "Oh no, you see, I'm the female officer that brought them." You know, they're not very understanding about that. But I started looking very much like the people that I was taking out there. And about 3 years later, I was transferred to a district. And my assignment was to investigate sexual assault against adult females and children, domestic violence. I started doing undercover drug work. I started doing undercover gambling work. And then with my 7 male plainclothes unit counterparts, when we got bored of work, we just worked undercover. And a lot of police officers get into that. You know, we created the phrase tailgate parties. We used to load the backs of radio cars up with alcohol, and at the end of the shift, we would go out and we would drink. And we would drink until the next shift. And many times I didn't make it the next day. But we have honor among officers, and we would cover for each other. I hold one of the few records in my home group in reference to my driving skills. I have to tell you a little bit about those. I started out with an Impala convertible, and I rationalized in my mind that the reason I was having all these accidents was that the car was too big for me. So I one day was driving along, and I pulled into a foreign motors place, and I bought an MGB right off the showroom floor. The insanity part of that is that I had never driven a gear shift. And I got in that car and I just hopped it all the way home because I couldn't drive it. But when I finished with the Impala, it looked like a Volkswagen. And when I finished with that MGB, it looked like a Tinker Toy. I'll tell you just a little bit about one of my accidents. I hold the record in my home group for hitting two parked cars in a house in one night. And I'll tell you how that happened. I had been out for the evening, and I was this kind of drunk. I dressed to go out for the evening. You know, low-cut stuff, kind of hanging out of there and all, and pants that looked like they were painted on you. Thanks, Faye. And I had been out for the evening, and I was driving along in this MGB, and I hit two parked cars and bounced off of those, and I hit the front of a man's house. And what I had actually hit was his front steps. And they went up about 8 feet off the ground, and I moved those front steps about 12 feet down the street. And I had totaled my car, and I get out of my car, and I start surveying the situation. Now, I don't know about the neighborhood you live in, but in this neighborhood, when you hit two parked cars in a house, everybody comes out and wants to see exactly what happened. So I'm standing there in all my glory, starting to cry. And I was wearing all this eye makeup, and it started to run, and I looked like a fat Tammy Baker. And the eye makeup's running. I had lost one of my shoes, and by now the owner of the house has appeared in his front door in his underwear. And I look up and I see this skinny little man standing there wearing nothing but underwear. And you know all those character defects they talk about in this program? Well, they were all coming out of his mouth at one time because his steps were moved about 10 feet down the street. And he was trying to steal my show. I was trying to explain to these people what happened. And he's yelling and cussing and carrying on. And just like the obnoxious, belligerent little woman alcoholic I was, I looked up at him and I knew that I had to stop him so that I could get control of this crowd again. And I simply said to him, "Excuse me, but are you looking down my blouse?" And if he could have gotten to me, he'd have killed me right there. It was about that time that I heard the sirens and saw the blue lights flashing in a distance, and I was really happy to hear them. I was really glad about it because I knew that my brothers would get there, and they would straighten this mess out, and they'd send that old fart back in his house, you know, and keep him quiet and give me the show back. So when the radio cars pulled up,
And they got out of the car and they took one look at me. And I started to say something, and some of you may have experienced this. This officer walked over to me and snatched me right out of the one shoe I was wearing, dragged me into a firehouse, and told me not to say another word. And there I sat in this firehouse in all my glory. And now I'm really crying. I am really crying because I can't figure out what in the hell happened here. And I don't know about you, but I smoke. And I was sitting there, and when I get drunk, I either had a cigarette and no match, or a match and no cigarette. And I'm digging in my purse trying to find my matches. I had this cigarette. And I asked somebody, does anybody have a match? And about that time, the bells start going off in the firehouse, and everybody started running around. And I said, isn't that nice? They're all going out to get me a match. I couldn't figure out that they were going to a fire. But that's the kind of alcoholic woman I was. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter how I abused other people and other things, as long as I was happy. And my job kind of got a wind of what was happening, and they transferred me. They transferred me because of alcoholism. They transferred me back to women's detention. And it was there that I decided that these people do not appreciate all the good things I can do for them. So I decided to kill myself. But before I was going to kill myself, I had seen a couple bodies that people hadn't gotten to in 2 or 3 days. So I decided to write a note to direct how I wanted my funeral to go. There were a lot of people that I didn't want at my funeral, people who had been mean and unkind to me. So I wrote in this note to my friend, Mary, don't allow these people into the funeral home. Just allow my friends to come by, look down at my casket, and say, isn't Jean beautiful? Isn't it sad that she died the way she did? You know, we should have been nicer to her. And then I decided after my letter was written that I would call Mary and tell her I was getting ready to kill myself so that the body could be found the next morning. And she said to me, Jean, you know what I think you need? I think you need a psychiatrist. So she came the next morning and she took me to a psychiatrist. And this was really interesting because, again, I went before a 3-man board. And I started explaining to them all these fears that I had and all these things that I was afraid of. And they asked me, did I drink? And I said, no, I only have 1 beer on the weekends. Now, I've never met an alcoholic that's honest the first time. They always have 1 beer on the weekends. So they decided to test me and to find out what was wrong with me. And if any of you have ever taken these tests, I'll tell you how to pass them. They asked me to draw a house, and I drew a house with no windows and no doors. And they asked me to draw a tree, and I drew a picture with a tree with no leaves and no foliage. And they asked me to draw a picture of a nude man and a nude woman. So I didn't know these psychiatrists very well. So way up in the corner, I drew 2 little stick people. And they were going over this test, and the psychiatrist said to me, what is this? And I said, that's my nude man and my nude woman. And they said, how can we tell the nude man from the nude woman? I said, because the nude man has bigger feet. And they started treating me for sex problems. And I was in this psychiatric program for sex problems for 2 years. Now, one of the things I want you to remember is this psychiatrist asked me if I played with my food. This is a very interesting question. And I was about 50 pounds heavier than I am now. And I said, do I look like I played with my food? And he said, when you eat mashed potatoes, and I wish I would have let you know this story before tonight's dinner, because I noticed we had mashed potatoes. So when you eat mashed potatoes, do you make little mashed potato balls and stir mashed potatoes and make little dips in them? And I thought about that, and I said, well, what does all that mean? He said, sex problems are shown in the way people eat mashed potatoes. So the next time you're in a restaurant, watch the way people eat mashed potatoes. I was in that psychiatric program for 2 years, and I decided that I had to graduate. I had to get out of here. So they decided to retest me. And they asked me to draw a picture of a house, and I drew a picture with a lot of doors and windows and people standing in the windows and little curtains. And they asked me to draw a picture of a tree. And I drew a picture of a tree with a lot of leaves and fruit and a little dog underneath, people sitting around the yard. And then they asked me to draw a picture of a nude man. And I asked that psychiatrist for a bigger piece of paper. And I graduated first in my class from the psychiatric program. I was at work one day, and by now I had gotten into Valium and Elavil and sleeping pills. And I came completely apart because I've never seen on a medicine bottle where it says, take with alcohol. And I started mixing these drugs. When I would give prisoners drugs in the cell block, if I was giving them Valium, I'd say, you know, I take this too, but I don't have one with me. And they would give me one. And if I took care of 5 prisoners, I took 5 Valium. And I was taking Elavil before I left home. And I was drinking on the job. And I was at work, and I came completely apart. And I was relieved of duty and taken to the hospital. My gun and badge was taken from me. I was relieved of all my police duties, and I was sent home to report to the medical bureau 3 days later to be surveyed for retirement. They no longer needed my services in law enforcement. And I went down to the medical bureau, and I talked to the doctor, and somehow the paperwork got mixed up. I had tried to straighten myself out within 3 days, and they sent me back to work. And this time they transferred me to a district and to a plainclothes unit. And that district that they transferred me to was an area that housed the block area. And they were having a problem with prostitution on the block area. And they said, you know, we're going to send Jean down as an undercover prostitute to arrest men for solicitation. And that is where I always wanted to be anyway. I finally became the $100 woman I always wanted to be. But they made the mistake of putting my corner in front of the Armstead Hotel and Bar. And I immediately got on the reward system. The first night I was out, a man pulled up in a car, and he solicited me for a perverted sex act. Now, my face turned red, and my mouth fell open, and I couldn't get an answer out. Now, I won't tell you what he said, but I will tell you what he testified to the next morning in court. He said, Your Honor, I didn't say that. What I said to this detective was, do you think you have enough air to blow up my flat tire? Now, use your imagination. Somebody said to me, Gene, you know, to calm yourself down a little bit, maybe you ought to have a little drink. And I thought that was a great idea. And I went into the Armstead Hotel and Bar, and I had a glass of whiskey. And I went back out on that corner, and I thought I was a real prostitute. I started locking them up left and right. The only problem was, at the end of the night, I couldn't remember who I locked up. I couldn't remember why I locked them up. My backup team was writing notes, telling me before we went into court what had happened. I was in a blackout so quick. They put up with this for 2 years, and they decided to transfer me back inside to a desk job. They said, you know, it's the only way we can control Jean's drinking. If we put her at a desk and watch her, she won't drink. Now, they didn't know how clever us alcoholics can be. Now, my first week inside, I was working at this desk doing administrative work. The lieutenant comes by and he said, Gene, are you drinking? I said, yes, sir. He said, what have you got in that cup? I said, hot tea and scotch. And he said, why are you drinking on duty? I said, Lieutenant, I've got cramps. Now, if you ever want to get over on a man, tell him you've got cramps, because he doesn't pursue it. I am the only female officer in that district that had cramps 30 days a month. The ironic part of that was that I had had a hysterectomy 3 years before, and they never knew. I stayed working inside administration for 6 years. I had been in law enforcement close to 19 years, and I had never made detective. Normally it takes our women 3 to 4 years to make detective, but you see, alcoholism got in the way. It got in the way of the goals that I had set for myself as a female rookie. It took precedent over everything I did. But the department decided to give me a gift. They said, Jean's the oldest woman in this department. She's been here longer than any other woman and has not made detective. We think we'll give her a gift and we'll transfer her to detectives. And I was transferred to detectives close to 19 years in the department. And 7 months later, I cannot tell you why to this day, I took my last alcoholic drink. 5 years before coming into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had gone to Richmond to see my stepfather. He was having open heart surgery, and I didn't want him to die without seeing me. So I traveled to Richmond so that he could see this cute little female alcoholic, and he could die in peace. And he took one look at me and recovered. And several months later, I had gone back to Richmond to visit him, and he gave me a stack of books. And there were history books and different kinds of books, and in that stack of books when I got home was a book with the title Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, nah, I'll wait for the movie. And I put that book in my storage locker, and I never opened it. 7 months after being transferred, I woke up one morning and I looked all around my room. I looked to see if I had brought anybody home, because you see, I couldn't decide whether I was in love and in heat or in heat, and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous explained that to me when I got here. But I looked all around the room to see who I brought home, and I went to the window to look for my car, as I had often done, to see if there was any damage, and I was standing there at the window, and I said, God, to see if there was any damage, and I was standing there at the window, and I said, God, I can't live like this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And it was in July, and I decided I'll call these people at Alcoholics Anonymous. And I called them up and I said, I have this slight problem with alcohol, and I might need a little help. You see, I didn't know what you were all about. And they told me where a meeting was. And I said, well, I can't go today because I'm real busy, but I could probably go Saturday. You see, I knew that in the summertime, when you drank, that alcohol comes through the pores and people could smell it on you. And I didn't want the people in Alcoholics Anonymous to smell alcohol on me and know what a serious alcohol problem that I had. And so I waited 3 days before I went to my first meeting. And I put myself together as best I could. I combed my hair, and I tried to get dressed, but by now I was shaking rather badly. And I drove to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And I thought you were a religious group, and that you would probably pray me sober, and that you had a choir and they would sing. And I got out of my car, and I remember standing there, and I couldn't move, because I glanced over at the side, and there was a group of young people there, and they were all clean and their hair combed nice, and I couldn't walk in front of them. I couldn't walk past them to get into that door, because I was afraid they'd make fun of me. They'd make fun of me and they'd call me an old drunk. And I had been called that so many times that I couldn't face that again. And I just stood there and I couldn't walk into that meeting. And just about then, a woman pulled up in a car and she parked in front of me. And I said, excuse me, miss, are you going in there to some kind of meeting? And she said, do you mean Alcoholics Anonymous? And by now I am really crying. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she took me by the hand and she led me into my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I sat in the back of the room, and I immediately looked down at the floor because I didn't want you to see me. You know, I compare that to a dog I have at home. We can throw a paper bag on the floor and he'll get in it and he'll think he's gone. And I sat in the back of that room. But I heard a man in the front of the room say, "I haven't had a drink in 5 years." And I said, "Liar." And I immediately went back to looking at the floor. And I heard somebody say at the end of the meeting, "I have no idea what took place. The big book is in the back of the room." And I thought it was a Bible. And that if I came to a couple meetings, you all would let me go back there and look at this book. And it was probably in a little room in the back. And but you had to not have alcohol for a couple days to do that. So that was my impression of the big book. And I didn't hear much else, but I knew when I got here, I had never met anybody that didn't want something for nothing. And I knew you'd want something from me. And I had a plan when I got here. I knew you would break us down into beginners, intermediates, and advanced. And I didn't want to go into the beginners group. I wanted to go right into the intermediate group. So I knew you would ask me for something. You would ask me how much money I made, or what kind of car I drove, or what kind of house I lived in. So I decided right away I would lie to you. And I would tell you I didn't have anything, and therefore I wouldn't have to give you anything. And at the end of the meeting, everybody stood up. And I thought it was kind of like a little Catholic church, so I stood up too. And both people on either side of me grabbed my hands. And I said, "Oh shit, now they're going to rob me." You know? And I was still crying, and the woman next to me said, "Go over to that coffee pot and get yourself a cup of coffee." So I walked over there, and by now I'm really perspiring, and my mouth was very dry, and I had white things around it. My hands were shaking, and there was an old-timer standing there. And he looked at me, and he said, "You know how these old-timers are? They gotta get ready to tell us anything. You know, they know when we're new." So he gets ready, and he's up on his toes. He said, "You new, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, but I'm going into the intermediate group." I think he got the hint right away. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't even fake it here, you know. I could fake it all my life, but I couldn't fake it in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I said, I'm not real sure what to do now. And see, I came here for you to put a Band-Aid on a severed artery. All I wanted was a little help. You know, slow me down. Get me going on the right track and send me back out. And I said, "I don't know what to do." And he said, "Well, you've got to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. If I'm going to 90 meetings in 90 days, when am I going to have a chance to practice?" And he said, "Practice what?" And I said, "Slowing down." Now, he informed me that Alcoholics Anonymous was a non-drinking fellowship. And I didn't know that. But he must have read my mind. And I thought, well, how's he going to know? So he said, "Another thing, Alcoholics Anonymous is an honesty program." And I had never heard that before. That was something new. So he said, "Tomorrow, you've got to go to the Evergreen Group." Now, the Evergreen Group in Baltimore is the largest group we have. More than 750 people. Every Sunday go to the Evergreen Group. They've got Al-Anon and Alateen, ACOA, smokers, non-smokers, speakers, promises, step meeting, you name it, they've got it. And the only reason I went is because I thought he was going to be there the next day checking on me. And you know, I didn't see him there. But I walked in, and I walked into the first room I came to, which was the speaker's room, and I sat in the back of the room, and I cried again. And I was crying through the whole meeting, and feeling quite ashamed and sorry for myself. But this time, when you all said the Lord's Prayer, I knew, you weren't going to rob me, so I stood up. They said the Lord's Prayer, and I sat back down, and everybody left. And I was sitting in that room by myself. And I said, I wonder where they all went. I guess they forgot to tell me where to go. And I'm sitting there, and a woman walked into the room, and she walked to the front of the room, and she was counting money. And I said, well, she must be a trustee. They let her handle that money. So I went down and I said, my name is Jean, and I'm not cured yet. So there was a little woman about this big, and she looked over her glasses, and she said, have a seat over there. I said, I got that. So I went over there and I sat down, and after the meeting, the woman introduced herself to me as Carol, and she later became my sponsor. And she took me out to breakfast that morning. And to show you how paranoid I was at that time, she and her husband put me in the back seat of their Cadillac. And it only had 2 doors. And I put my hand in my purse, and I had my hand on my gun the whole time. I thought they were going to take me out and rob me. That's how paranoid I was and frightened of people when I got here. And they took me out to breakfast, and she explained some of the program to me, and she explained what the big book was of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, somebody gave me that book 5 years ago, but I never opened it. And I went home that day and I opened the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I saw an inscription in there that had been written 5 years before from my father. And I also found an article entitled Fathers and Daughters, and I had never seen it until that moment. So you see, the big book gives us an awful lot of things. After I had attended 3 meetings in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I called my father in Richmond, who was celebrating his 36th year in this program, and I called him up to tell him how this program works. And he said, I'll come right to Baltimore. And he came right to Baltimore, and he took me to the Towson group, which was a group of old-timers. And it was a wonderful group. It's the second oldest group in Baltimore. And I listened to those old-timers, and I love old-timers. They have such wisdom that they were willing to share with me. And I wasn't ready to admit that I was an alcoholic. I had drank alcoholically for 19 years. I had been transferred twice, had no relationships, no friends. But I wasn't willing to admit that. And I heard one of those old-timers in a meeting say, if prudence, common sense, and past experience tell you not to drink, and you do anyway, chances are you're an alcoholic. And I think it was at that moment that I surrendered, because I looked at my past experience, all the abuse that I had subjected not only myself to, but other people, just to have access to alcohol. And I surrendered that I was an alcoholic. And I heard a lot of wisdom in that room. It was my first couple months of sobriety, and it was October. And I was sitting at this long kitchen table with all the babies. And we started worrying about Christmas. You know how we can't take one day at a time yet. We've got to worry about Christmas. We didn't even get through Thanksgiving. And we're sitting there and we're saying, now we don't know how to get through Christmas. I don't know how I'm going to get through Christmas. I don't know if I can stay sober. And we're watching one of the old-timers sitting at the end of the table, and he was just watching us. And we knew he had the answer. We knew he had the secret answer of how to keep us sober for Christmas. And we said, John, we said, how can we stay sober during Christmas? And he said, it's very simple. He said, this is what I do. He said, Christ didn't get drunk on my birthday, and I'm not getting drunk on his. And do you know I understood that? And it has kept me sober every single Christmas. It was the simplicity of the program. I was sober about 3 months. Talk about miracles in the program. I was sober 3 months, and my sponsor decided to take me to the Chip House to a meeting. And the Chip House is a halfway house for men alcoholics. And they're real rough and tough down there. And I hadn't gotten in to looking up at meetings yet. And I immediately went in and I looked at the floor. And I heard a woman step to the podium, and she said, "My name is so-and-so. I've been arrested 124 times. I found Alcoholics Anonymous in Baltimore City Jail, and I've been sober 12 years. And I recognized that voice. I looked up, and the last time I saw that woman, she was peeing in my shoe. A miracle of the program. And after the meeting, she comes running over to me. She recognized me, and thank God she didn't tell anybody who I was. And she comes running over to me, and she says, "How you doing? We've been waiting for you." I put my mother through quite a time. My mother was living in Texas, and she would come to visit me during my alcoholic drinking days. And I was always going to sober up. I was going to sober up before she got there. And she was coming from Texas, and it was one of those times that I was going to sober up, and I just couldn't. And all of a sudden, there's a knock at the door, and I knew it was my mother. And I had the shakes very badly. My hair was matted. I had no makeup on and a dirty old bathrobe. And I opened the door, and she looked at me, and I said, "Mom, I got something to tell you. I got Hodgkinson's disease." And in a true Al-Anon fashion, she looked at me and said, "Do you want a second opinion?" You know, I could never fool her. When I came to this program, you all told me things, and you said, "Take what you want and leave the rest." And one of the things you told me is that I was not to get hungry, tired, angry, or lonely. And I was drawn to this word tired. Do not get tired. So I had brought my mother to live with me by now, and I went home. I said, "Mom, those good people down Alcoholics Anonymous told me that I am not to get tired. So you're going to have to start handling everything around the house. I've got to get plenty of rest and sit and get sober and recover." And this went along real well for about a month. And on a Saturday, she marched into my room, and she snatched me out of my bed on a Saturday, marched me into the living room, and she said, "See that? Use it." I said, "Mom, I'm in recovery. You know, I'm not supposed to get tired." And I looked at it, and there was a dust rag, and I hadn't seen one in quite a few years. So I went in, and I got on the phone to my sponsor, Carol, and I said, "Carol, my mother obviously does not understand this program, and you need to come over and straighten her out. She has shown me a dust rag and expects me to use it." And Carol said, "Gene, after you finish dusting, we'll go to a meeting." And the next week, on Saturday, my mother snatched me out of bed and marched me in and showed me an iron and an ironing board. But this time, I knew better than to call Carol. So you have taught me that I have responsibilities and that I have to live up to them. A lot of things have been happening in my sobriety, and I just want to tell you a couple. I was sober about 6 months, and I'm in detectives, and my primary interest was violent crime against women. And I went up to our education and training division, and I said, "You know, I think we could train our 3,500 officers better than we do in interviewing victims of violent assault and criminal investigation." And they said, "You know, Gene, that's a pretty good idea. We'll start giving you an hour a week in the in-service training program, and you can start instructing our officers any way you want." And I started teaching at the academy an hour a week. And a couple of weeks later, they said, "You know, we ought to send Jean to the Maryland Training Commission and have her certified." I could have told them I was certified several years before, but they meant as a Maryland law enforcement training officer. And they sent me to school, and they had me certified as a law enforcement training officer. And while I was still assigned to detectives part-time, I started teaching at the academy, and they asked me if I would be willing to teach all our trainees criminal investigation. And they started sending me out to do lectures in the public. And there was a time when they wouldn't let me out to empty the trash, but now they were sending me out to lecture to the medical field and to the legal field and to citizens groups, violent assault and victimology. And I was doing that for a while, and I was asked to head an investigation in Baltimore City that involved more than 100 police officers and 3 police agencies, and it was an investigation of violent crime. The crime spree had been going on for 18 months, and you taught me something here. You said, the same person will drink again. And I related that to criminology. The same person will make the same mistakes. And I came up with a plan to capture 2 felons in Baltimore City using the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that you gave me. And as a result of that, I received the Bronze Star from my agency and was given the Sun Papers Officer of the Year. So this program works in my life. I've received numerous honors and awards throughout the state of Maryland. I was being honored at a dinner one night for contributions to the citizens of Baltimore and to law enforcement. And it was at a very prestigious club. And it was by a group of professional women. And I arrived at that dinner, and I was feeling very full of myself and that I had done everything that I needed to do. And I got out of the car and I glanced across the street at a small park. And it all came back to me. 2 years before coming into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I laid in that park, so sick, vomiting and urinating on myself that the police had to come and take me home. I know how close that park and this podium really is. In 1988, as a result of the gifts that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me, I was one of 5 officers in the state of Maryland and the only female ever to receive the Governor's Award from the state of Maryland for excellence in law enforcement and dedication to the citizens that I was sworn to serve. I set goals for myself 25 years ago when I entered this job, and it wasn't to come about until I entered this program. This program gave me everything that I was searching for in a bottle and in a bar. You taught me the meaning of love, and you taught me self-respect. I can walk in front of a group of people now, and I don't have to worry that they'll make fun of me and call me an old drunk. I love being with you tonight, and I love being a part of you. Thank you for having me at the Shenandoah Roundup.
Thank you, Jane. We have a little gift for you. Could I ask you to come back up? Yeah, I saw that. I'm getting my cues from back here, from my better half. Again, I want to thank you, Jean, for a fine evening. We have a real nice way of closing in the Waynesboro group. We do say the Lord's Prayer. We join hands. Could we do that tonight?